are as we go into a conversation about family and really what is family. We're in the home stretch. And I just wanted to just take a moment just before we go into this conversation, which is going to be fantastic, and do a couple thank yous. I really have to thank, you've heard a lot of thanks about the funders, the partners in the field, but I have to really thank the Ascend team. And you might have your sort of special and favorite Ascender, but the entire team is really pretty spectacular. And I just really wanted to thank Veronica McLaughlin, Tiffany Day, Portia Polk, Lori Severance, Lindsay Brohill, Kimberly Frank, Andrea Camp, Lauren Beal, James White, Hallie Young, Eddie Ensenales, David Kroom, Lori Severance, again, double, I don't know how that happened, Sarah Haight, and Marjorie Sims. Like it's double love for Lori, I don't know. Thank you all. And I have to thank the Aspen Office Services and Tech team, because the Ascend team, as you guys might, and I'm just like now going family with Aspen, we're always kind of pushing limits about, we're like, oh, we can do this, we can do that. And on this one, we might have pushed a little fired code concerns because there are just so many amazing leaders that wanted to be here. And more importantly, we wanted to be with you. And so it's just been really joyful. And I cannot thank the Ascend team enough. They are one of the most creative, committed, dedicated colleagues on the planet. So thanks to them. So moving into this conversation, I think it's kind of appropriate that we're going to close out a little bit with our final session to really kind of think about how are we redefining, how are we thinking about family, identity, and parenting in the 21st century. I'm ready to take some notes myself. And as we do this, I had a couple sort of thoughts I wanted to, well, actually, I'm not going to do a lot of bios because I really want to get to the conversation, but you have Elisa Pressman here, who is the founder of the Parenting Center at Mount Sinai Hospital. She's a development psychologist. And what is going to be exciting, in addition to all that she brings, but she is also bringing hospitals and healthcare into this conversation. We have the fabulous Mia Birdsong, who's an Ascend fellow who is an author, a community curator, about to come out with a new book. And has also been, I think, a real leader in thinking about social capital in today's world and about lifting up voice. And then we have Lori and Anthony Barr, that they together are creating the Raise the Bar Foundation. And as a mother-son team, really thinking about the two-generational work. Lori is the senior vice president of the foundation, and Anthony, and there's a whole other little family here, is a starter for the Minnesota Vikings. I, of course, grew up in Pittsburgh, so I'm sort of a Steelers gal. I think Joe Jones has some crazy team called the Ravens or something. But also is not only working on his philanthropy and giving back, but also is an all-pro player for the Minnesota Vikings. So just a little bit, there's lots more bios on how fabulous they all are. So kind of getting into the conversation, though, I did want to kind of pull Eldar's voice in, and I also really appreciated Aisha bringing Adichie's voice in. Because if any of you have not sort of read her writings and thinking about certainly the reading of The Danger of a Single Story, it is just such a powerful read just to kind of remind us about the traps societies can fall into, but frankly, we can all fall into. And so I really loved you bringing that in, Aisha. And just to kind of quote Eldar to remind us from where we started about the importance of context, is when we fail to understand context, negative attribution results, creating the opportunity for predatory, punitive, expensive results. And so, as we just kind of bring that into this work, let's then think for everybody, if you were thinking about parenting and family, you might have a different vision, a different word, a whole different conversation you might even be expecting. And so I just want to give a few kind of data points just to ground it. This will not outline it, but it's just some perspective. One of the things when we think about the importance of this intergenerational work, Raj Chetty's work has been referenced throughout, but he has done a powerful body of work really making it very clear the concerns around eroding in social and economic mobility. And at the heart of the two-generation approach is really looking at the child and the caregiver/parents, the interplay and the inextricable link between income, health, education, of parent and child. And so how are we really thinking about that in today's world? And I don't know how many of you had a chance to see in the New York Times this weekend the article, or actually it was the Washington Post, Parenting and Inequality. And parenting is just sort of out there in a lot of different ways, from how to parent to inequality. And one of the things that I wanted to call back, someone who's really done some seminal research, Sean Reardon at Stanford, where he really put a very fine and important picture on the achievement gap. Some kids are soaring, some kids might be lagging behind. That is not by lack of parents trying to make the right decision. What actually really breaks down, if you go behind looking at some of that achievement gap, is parents who might have lower incomes are still trying to do all of the extra after-school activities. If you're on the higher income level, you might be tutoring, ballet, violin, carpooled everywhere. You've just got that sort of glide path. Other parents and families are doing that as well, but there's an inequality issue for how we even think about talking about achievement gap issues. One thing when we talked about issues of isolation and social capital, I'm sure will come up here a little bit, but 92% of Americans believe that intergenerational activities can reduce isolation, how we connect. And then lastly, and this will be a great jump to Mia, who's going to kind of kick us off, with kind of thinking about family in today's world and parenting. 7.6 million children right now live in households headed by grandparents or other relatives. And so just as we think about it, there's no one family, there's no one way, and there's no better person to kick off the conversation than Mia Birdsong.
That was going to get questioned. That's all right. I'll just No, don't even worry about it. So what I want to say is...
so how you're defining family and...
Yes, totally.
Okay.
I got
somewhat
you.
nearby.
I got you.
Okay.
So before I talk about how family is defined, I want to talk about our existing public narrative about family, right? So there's the way I think about it. And we have a public narrative that is hierarchical. And the insular, heteronormative, married, middle-class family raising biological children is our gold standard, right? They might be same-sex, but it's still a very heteronormative frame. And I want to highlight the bit about it that is that they are insular, right? This family is able to do all of the things that they need to do for themselves with the two adults who are in it. So that is some bullshit. Two people who have jobs cannot themselves raise children, right? I am a cisgendered heterosexual woman married to a cisgendered heterosexual man. We are raising two biological children. We do not do that by ourselves. And part of what I've seen in my research is that the families who are trying to do that are like, why is this so hard? And I'm like, because you can't do that. That's not how we're meant to do this. And the people who I've seen who know that the best are unmarried mothers, right? I was raised by a single mother. My mother did not raise me by herself. My dad was certainly in the picture in lots of ways, but geographically was very far away. So I had a whole cadre of aunties, none of whom were my mother's biological siblings, because she's the only child, right? So I had all of these chosen aunties who helped raise me. So I want to pull apart that hierarchy some, because when I ask families, what makes family to you? No one says anything structural. No one talks about blood or law or marriage or legality. Everyone says, what makes a family? Love, right? So we have a system when it comes to thinking about policies and practices that looks at family as a structural function, when in fact it is actually like who cares for us, who shows up for us, who do we care about, who do we consider our loved ones? And we really need to be shifting both the hierarchy, like flattening that, so we're not saying that this standard that we have is the thing we're trying to move everybody toward, but accepting people where they are and accepting their own definitions of who their family is. I'll stop there for now.
That's pretty good. Excellent. Thank you, Mia.
Sure.
Let's go next to you, Elisa, and talk about sort of how you are thinking about expanding and how we're shifting narratives about parenting and families from your perspective.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure.
So from where I sit, I'm trying to speak only through the lens of being in a hospital setting.
And can you describe a little bit of your hospital setting so people can sort of see it and feel it?
Sure. So I'm at Mount Sinai Hospital, which is in Harlem, and or the main campus is in Harlem. There are like 18 Mount Sinai's that are part of the larger Mount Sinai, and we are housed in the Department of Pediatrics. The Mount Sinai Parenting Center is really, our mission is to leverage every single healthcare moment between a family and a provider to make sure that even in the waiting room and in every interaction, we take advantage and make sure that all families feel the weight of how important we know they are. And so to define family from where we're coming from is however the families who come in who want to have care for their children, 99% of babies in this country are born in hospitals. So we're seeing a lot of those babies. I mean, at Mount Sinai alone, we have 16,000 babies born a year. So we have a very important responsibility to start the conversation as family is more than what we decide it is. So, Daniel, his father, and his son, that's a family. I have a father who's at home right now taking care of my daughter so that I can be here. I think we all define family however we come in. I saw a quote that I use often, which is, if a flower doesn't bloom, we don't change the flower, we change the environment in which it grows. And so from my perspective, from a hospital's perspective, it's our job to set that environment up from the beginning to support families.
Thank you, thank you. And Lori, can I ask you to share your thoughts about sort of how we're expanding and shifting narrative about family?
Right, so you kind of touched on some of the data in your opening comments. But something that I recently read was a study by the Pew Research Institute. It was done in 2015, so it's a little over 3 years old. And it found that, quote, there's no longer one dominant family form in the US. And they also found that children living in two-parent households was on the decline, and children living in single-parent households, primarily led by mothers, is on the increase almost threefold. So we already know that, but we don't need to know that. We know what the data says, right? Because we are living it. We see it daily. It's the folks who aren't looking up from their phones in their lives to recognize that families have fundamentally changed. And we kind of see this reflected a little bit in entertainment and in media, right? We see it in TV shows like Modern Family, This Is Us, and we know how that influences public perception, and that's a good thing. And so I kind of think that Anthony has a unique opportunity with the position that he's in to also influence public perception by telling his story, by sharing our story, because our family looks very different from almost any other family you might see. There's a single mother with a biracial son who was married then divorced and had a multicultural son. His father was an immigrant from El Salvador. And so when we go out and people see us, they think I'm either a babysitter, a date, I've adopted them, or we're just friends hanging out. And people, it's funny to see people's, and kind of sad to see people's faces when I say, well, no, I'm their mother, because they're very surprised. And so I think we do that by telling our stories, by listening, by being non-judgmental. I know Raise the Bar is trying to do it by expanding programming on college campuses to include single-parent scholars and addressing their most immediate needs as well.
Thank you, Lori. We're going to come to you in a second. I'd love to ask all of you, when we're thinking about kind of the work that you're doing, what are sort of the implications and some of the opportunities to shift some of the structures or system or institutions that are going to be more effective in connecting with families and really kind of also helping to open up this narrative and just reality. Why don't we go first with you?
So we need to change the perspective and the mindset of everybody who's working in a hospital about how to define family and the importance and respect for families. That's our big mission. And it starts in many ways with the recognition that we can't change mindset that's been around forever as easily as we can changing the mindset of families who are new and walking in, and of new care providers, and also making sure that at the top of these administrations, you have support. So one program that we're doing in partnership with the Bezos Family Foundation is piloting an environmental transformation where everything from the walls to the hallways to the screensavers where nurses are plugging in information have messaging that not only supports families but also inspires the providers, and training them to buy into the idea that parents matter, families matter, and you matter as a provider. Like, why did you come here? Why is this your job? Why did you decide to work in this place, in this field? And not just the nurses and the doctors, but even, Dr. Besser yesterday mentioned that it was in, I believe it was reception, that noticed that developed a relationship with the mom so that they could understand that the reason why that child was having trouble and not thriving and not growing was because he was hungry. So making everybody understand that their role is very important. If you're in security, we're training you to feel empowered to give a good luck and to say something that you come up with that matters for the new parents that are walking out of the hospital. So changing that whole system, and certainly starting with, of course, we are very lucky because we have the buy-in of a president who supports this, who's on the board of the Aspen Institute. So we're in a very
Ken
good
Burns,
position.
keep doing the good work.
And a dean who's a psychiatrist. So we are in a really lucky position there. But it's not just that leadership. It really is making sure that everybody who walks in, and starting with new families who don't necessarily know if they're going to be supported or not supported. They're not sure what they're getting into. We all, well, for those of you who are parents here, that moment where your brain and your baby's brain are both developing so rapidly is a new opportunity to decide if you believe in and trust the providers that are going to be around you. Now, we see in well child visits in the clinic, there are 15 well child visits in just those first few years. So many opportunities to show families that we're partners, and no longer that we're telling them we're only talking to mom. We're calling mom mom and not thinking about her name. And we are only concerned with the particular moment that we're having without taking into account the whole range of context that we're in. And at the same time, and the reason why the Environmental Transformation Project is so important to us, is that when we're training staff, we're taking into account the context of the staff, whether it's because they're rushed residents who are overwhelmed, or because they're staff members who, in a large part, I mean, there are 2,000 staff members we're training for this project, many of whom are in positions where they're barely making ends meet, and they're not feeling great about their job, and we need to uplift everybody that's working in that space so that there is a smile, so there is a connection between people, and so that it can start this tone where families, whoever comes in to care about these children, that's really all it is. If you're in the waiting room waiting for babies to be born, we're going to get to you and let you know how important it is that you're there.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Anthony and Lori and come back to you. So I'd love for you both to sort of talk about, why the raise the bar? I mean, you were thinking about how to change mindsets, how to think about programs, services, institutions. Can you share just a little bit more about that, both of you? And maybe Lori, you want to start?
Sure. So I got pregnant when I was 19 years old. I was away at college in South Bend, Indiana, and found myself expecting a baby going into my junior year. I ended up delivering him there at Memorial Hospital alone. My big family who lived in California was still in California. And I was by myself, and I was scared, and I didn't know what I was going to do. Few weeks later, I decided, I guess I probably should go home because I don't have a support system here. And so I did, and my parents welcomed us lovingly back into their home and really raised Anthony as their 7th child, as I'm one of 6, and he was the first grandson. And for a short while, I just stayed at home with him and didn't really know, I hadn't come up with a plan. I was young, and I had this baby, and I just didn't know what to do. I was kind of paralyzed by fear and stress and everything we've talked about. But then decided to go back to school. I knew that I needed to complete my education. I didn't know how I would pay for it, as my parents were funding it before I got pregnant, but weren't after. So I found a couple jobs. I waited tables. I worked as an aide at a elementary school. And in between those 2 jobs, I went to school. And I took out every loan that I could possibly take out. Stanford or Stafford loans, unsubsidized, subsidized. To this day, I owe over $100,000 in loans that I probably will never pay down. But I finished my degree, and at my graduation was my 3-year-old son standing there, and I have this great picture on our website of us 2 hugging, celebrating that accomplishment. I couldn't have done that without the support of my family and my parents watching him and helping while I was away at school and work, because I was gone from 6 a.m. until midnight, almost 6 days a week. And so fast forward, after raising him and raising my son who's 17, Nicholas, who's a senior in high school now, and when Anthony became so fortunate as to fulfill his lifelong dream of being able to play professional football, we kind of sat around and said, how can we impact others who are like us and affect change in the way of providing single moms an opportunity to go back to school, attain higher education, because we know that that will have an immediate impact on their lives. How can we help them? And how can we help them avoid having to accrue so much debt that they may be earning at a certain level, but that money is going straight to student loans, childcare, and so there's really, they get stuck in a trap. And so we decided that's where we wanted to put our effort and our energy, into helping families like ours create that opportunity and create a space where both the mother and the children can thrive.
Yeah, so Anthony Barr, hello. So about the foundation, yeah, my mom and I discussed it about, I think it was my 2nd year in the league. What can we do? How can we do more for others? And my focus is more so on the child aspect, because I was one of those children, and raised by a single mom. Grew up in my grandparents' house with my other aunt, my other uncle. I don't look like, skin tone wise, I don't look anything like them, right? And it was just it was a great loving environment though, and that's all that really mattered. And that's all I knew, and that was perfect. I had a great childhood. I grew up learning that you have a mom, and you have a dad, and you have a dog, and you have a white picket fence, but that's not reality, and that wasn't my reality. And I didn't want that to be my reality. I was happy with my situation. And I know that there are so many children that don't have the opportunity that I was given in terms of going to a great school, a great high school, going to a great college, because their parents are struggling, or their parent is struggling, however you want to look at it. So I'm more focused on giving that child an opportunity to succeed. My mom couldn't do it by myself. I was with my grandma and my grandpa more so than I was with her for the first, I can't tell you, 8, 9 years of my life, because she was grinding. She was doing what she had to do for us. And I never felt like slighted by it or anything. Our relationship has been great because it was all about love and all about support. And families looks, to me, I feel like I have multiple families. I got my biological family, I got my mom, my grandparents, my cousins, then I got my football family. Mm-hmm. And the great thing about a locker room, the great thing about the NFL is it doesn't matter where you came from, it doesn't matter what you look like, what you believe in, this, that, the other, what you do in your free time. If you can contribute to the family in the locker room and help us succeed, you're more than welcome. And that's why I feel like with our family too. It's not about, we bring people that aren't family members into our family dinners all the time, because it's a loving, again, it comes back to love. And in the locker room it's kind of a microcosm of my biological family. And I feel like I've just been given so much opportunity that it's only right that trying to provide that opportunity to some other kid. Because I know there's how many stories of children that are great athletes or great, the next president or the next this or that, that doesn't get the opportunity and they kind of just fall by the wayside. So to try to avoid that, that's why we are doing what we're doing.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And I love how you bring in there are multiple families we're parts of, and they overlap. Mia, I mean, you have thought very deeply about this and thought about narrative and thought about sort of what's within systems, what's like really out, kind of what's maybe radical or transformational. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, sort of building on these comments about what can change, should change, insights when we think about systems and just how we live.
Yeah. So I think about the work that I do as being about the social contract, and there's both kind of what our institutions owe us and what we owe our institutions so that they give us what we want, right? So voting being the kind of most obvious thing that people talk about, but there's these ways in which we need to be civically engaged in order to make sure the institutions that set policy and kind of that the systems we all move through function well. So that's one aspect. And then there's what we owe each other, right? There are things that we actually do not want our government being responsible for. Like government doesn't give you love. Government doesn't tuck you in at night.
As much as we loved our public sector
awful,
panel.
Right? So in kind of both of those places, one of the things I'm thinking about is that you may all have heard that we have a loneliness epidemic. And there are lots and lots of reasons, I think, that we talk about, but one of the things that I look at is our understanding of what success looks like. So the things that are built into the American dream, right? The story we're told about, like how you make it. And that story largely depends on this idea of independence, right? That you are going to, I mean, there's kind of the extreme of pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, but this idea that you're going to work hard and then you're going to make it, and that you're going to do that by yourself. When in fact, we as human beings are deeply wired to be interdependent. Don't nobody do anything by themselves. You don't get anywhere by yourself. So when I think about that, and I think about kind of the story that we're told about success and the models that are held up for that, and what we're missing in terms of what actual interdependence looks like, the places that I have seen the most powerful, expansive, beautiful examples of what family and community look like are in the places where I see people struggling the most, right? So poor people, Black folks, sex workers, unhoused people, and all of these community, queer people, and all these places where I feel like people are dealing with often, systemic racism or patriarchy, are the places where I see people showing up for each other because systems don't actually work for them. And not only are those models, we also tell a story about a lot of those families and communities that suggest that they're broken in some way. I mean, there is an unending story that like Black families are broken, which is nonsense. They just don't necessarily look like, again, that kind of heteronormative, married, 2 kids, middle class version of family. Our families look like lots of things. So in those places where I see the most expansive and most connected examples of family and community are the stories that we actually need, all of us, right, as models for how we can do things differently. So that we're not trying to do the 2-parent on their own, raising children and like making money and doing whatever, but that we actually are thinking about like who are the people we want to be in community with, to help us raise our children, to help us get the emotional support that we need, to help us create space to feel like we can be vulnerable and feel connected and be authentic and not have to kind of demonstrate this idea of what it means to be successful, whether that's kind of a social media demonstration or what it looks like in terms of leadership. We uphold an idea of like what a good leader looks like, and largely that is based on kind of like a white man's idea of success. And I'm like, good leaders actually are able to be vulnerable, are able to be connected to people, are able to show emotion, right? So when I think about, for us, like what we all need, not only do we need to stop denigrating the ways in which people who are marginalized build family and community, but we actually need to lift those models up for ourselves because there are better ways for us to do it.
Thank you so much, Mia. I'd love to kind of ask you 2 more questions. One, Anthony, starting with you. But how do you ensure in this work, both that you're doing with the foundation, you're probably in formal roles, but then you're also in a lot of informal or just maybe different roles with the platform of being a professional athlete. But how you ensure sort of that work you're doing is grounded in children and families, and have you, some examples or also some shifts, like what, what does that look like for you when you do that?
Well, so our foundation was created by families, for families, and it was like it's such a personal mission that it's just it becomes it's almost easy, for me to do this, and it wasn't an easy process to start it, and obviously it's been a lot of work, and we're still fairly new, but it's so personal that it just feels right, and given my platform, and I kind of touched on it earlier, talking about how I just want to give children those opportunities, and I think people look at me as a role model. Kids look at NFL players and they want to be this and be that, but I think it's important for them to know that there's more than you can be than just a football player. You can be more than a football player. You can be more than a rapper. You can be more than all these other things that kind of, I think Black children are kind of boxed into, they should be this, they should be that. And I think that's kind of the message I want to get across while getting to know these families that we're helping, is you don't have to be just what I do or what my mom does. I mean, you could be anything you want. And that's really what kind of hits home for me.
That's awesome. Well, me and Elisa, I think it would love for you guys to share sort of, if you, maybe there's like how it comes to life, how putting children and families at the center might have shifted your practice, the hospital, to actually make that a reality, and also in the work that you do, Mia, with you travel in a lot of different circles, and what have been some shifts and some even ahas in that.
One thing that has been very important in our work at the hospital and my work is I remember when I finished my graduate degree, and I got my handshake for becoming an expert, and then I went to work in the hospital, and I had to just go be an expert to the residents and teach them their behavior and development rotation, and I was like, well, what's the curriculum? And they said, you do whatever you want. And at that point, and that's a whole other conversation because that was a problem in and of itself, was at that point I realized over time that you can't do that without talking to families, and you can't start the tone with residents who are setting their whole mindset for their practice working with families, usually about 1,500 families per year, if not more, that they're the expert. It has to be their partners, that I'm a partner, that we're support systems, not the expert, because the parents, I think we've talked about that enough, are the expert and the only person who knows each family and each unique situation, each child. So the most important way I think that's been integrated over time into my work and into our work is to figure out a way, and the best example I can give is in the residency, in the curriculum we created, Keystones of Development, we weave attachment, autonomy, and executive function skills into the well-child visits. And the thing that we focus on very much is this idea of autonomy, not just giving a child a sense of autonomy and agency, but giving parents a sense of autonomy and agency. So changing the experience in the room to telling parents exactly what to do, to asking parents what they think might work or what they've noticed has helped soothe their baby, or catching them doing something that they would love to see more of. So I think that tone has changed things. And also the idea that every time the parent feels more empowered, they can give that same sense to their child, and that we can give different have pediatricians say, I'm going to give you exactly what medication you need and exactly how to take it, but the parenting stuff is much more flexible. And there's a lot, it takes a very skilled pediatrician to be able to say that. There are some things that I have to say are exactly as so, but in terms of your parenting, which is a huge part of our partnership, I'm not the expert. I am here to guide, I'm here to support, but I'm not going to boss you around and tell you what to do.
Thank you.
One of the things that comes to mind for me is that when you groups of people who our systems don't work for end up creating their own systems and structures. And there's this community that I am connected to in East Oakland called Homefulness, and it's a group of formerly unhoused people who have basically convinced a bunch of rich white people to give them money to buy land. So they practice this incredible kind of like wealth redistribution. They have a whole workshop for people who have means to help them kind of figure out how to redistribute the wealth that they didn't really earn. So they've gotten a bunch of people to get them to buy land, and so they are building housing. But on this land, they also have, it's called the Decolonization Academy. So it's basically a school for like poor kids, right? So their children go to this school where they're teaching them, the way that they want to teach them. They're teaching them, things about their culture. They're teaching them about, colonization and racism and patriarchy in ways that you do not get in public school. So these kids get this education. They also have, a garden, and they have this amazing story about some goats they have. They have a radio station that they created themselves. And they have a commitment to, if many of them have been incarcerated, many of them have had their children taken by CPS. They've had all of these kind of interactions with policing and other kinds of related systems. So they've made a commitment to not involve those systems in any of the conflicts that they have. The only way that you can do that as a community is if you are deeply connected to each other. So they have a whole process where they have an elders council, and in their mind, elders means not only people who are have longevity in terms of age, but people who have been part of the community for a long time. So there's like an 18-year-old boy who grew up in the community who is on the Elders Council because he's been there and he understands kind of how the community functions. So when there's conflict, like those are the people who get brought in to figure out how to deal with things. And I love that they have basically been like, policing and the prison system does not work for us because all it's done is take our kids away and lock us up. So we're going to reject that system. There are zero circumstances under which we would call that system because we have our own system, and they've been very intentional about building that, but it only happens because they're in such deep community with each other. Mm-hmm. And when I see something like that, I myself am like, how do I make that happen in my community? So after I'm done with this book that I'm writing, kind of about all of this stuff, one of the things that I've started to do is talk to my neighbors about what transformative justice, which is part of kind of the frame that I would put this under, looks like in our community. Like if things happen in our neighborhood, how are we going to be connected enough to keep each other safe and to deal with conflict? So I'm just like, that's just an example of like, here's a thing that exists out in the world that's separate from the institutions and systems that we have. And I'm taking that as a model for how I want to recreate those things for myself and my own community.
So kind of building on all the comments, I'm going to do one more question, then we're going to bring everybody into the conversation. And Lori, I'll kick off with you. But so just what are your thoughts about how we can more effectively, concretely, you're talking to everybody here that they're running systems, programs, community, and out there, thank you all you live streamers, but what can we concretely do to help equip and support parents, families, that is really going to help move the family and the children to full potential, self-sufficiency, interdependence, but to really have the chance to get their full potential?
Well, I think it starts with us agreeing that this is not a zero-sum game. If we win, you don't lose. If they're doing something great, that doesn't mean that the light's not going to shine on us. We're all working on this together, in this together, with parents in the community and their children. And we need to listen, which means we need to listen, we need to validate, and we need to collaborate. And so those are things that we've talked about over the last 24 hours that just they're being repeated over and over, but now we really need to put it into practice and work closely with people who have an investment in their local community and understand what the needs are. And those are the parents and the children. And one of the things that we're doing in Minnesota is working really closely with Jeremiah Program and the University of Minnesota, because they interface on a daily basis with those moms and dads and those kids. And so far be it from us to walk in and go, oh, hey, Anthony's, famous in Minnesota here, and we just want to help, and we know what's going to be best for you. Mm-hmm. We don't know anything. We know what worked for our story, but we want to be your partner in this. And so I think it's all of those things. It's collaboration, partnership, listening, validating, and agreeing that if we work together, we all win.
That's really powerful. Thank you, Lori. Mia.
Yes. So we often talk about economic injustice as in a way that problematizes the people who are experiencing it, right? There are things we're going to do to and for people who are poor. When in fact, what has happened is we have a system that we've imposed onto a third of the country. So when I think about what we actually need to do, it is not about what things we're going to do to and for people who are poor, it's how we are going to remove that system from their lives. And that often means, for us, it means ceding a lot of power, and it means giving people money. It means access to money. One of the reasons I'm so excited about what Aisha is doing in Jackson is because she's like, the thing that these women are missing, right? They're poor. The thing they're missing is money. That is why they're poor, because they don't have money. It's actually a very, very simple solution, right? People are poor because they don't have money. So let's give them money. And I think there's a way in which we think that it's free money. And I'm like, no, they've earned it. Poor people work you all know this, poor people work their asses off, right? The problem is not that people are not working hard. The problem is not that they don't have managed money or they don't have the right whatever. It is that we have created a system that gets in their way. And our job is to remove as many of those barriers as we can.
Thank you.
So we know that the hospital is going to be just temporary time points, and that there are incredible programs in communities. There are incredible, we've heard from so many people in the past 36 hours, or however long this has been, of wonderful things that are going on. So from my perspective, what we're trying to do is say, what's free, what's easy to do, what doesn't take extra time from the people who are going to see families and from the families themselves. So why is there this horrible and tragic gap when you look at brains between 0 and 3 years old, and what has happened? So there are going to be many different reasons where this unevenness comes in, but the disparity when it comes to lack of exposure because your healthcare provider couldn't share with you while they were showing you how to change a diaper because you've never experienced that before, that if you're talking up close and using a sing-song voice and a happy face that you might naturally already be doing, but somebody said that's baby talk, that's going to grow your child's brain. That's free. It's the same amount of time that you take anyway because you have to change a diaper. And the nurse or the doctor has to show you how to do it anyway. So that's where we're coming in, is we're not trying to create interventions where we're fixing anything. We're not trying to take over communities that are doing beautiful work. We're really trying to say, when you're here, because you're going to be here so much in these first few powerful years, what can we do without making our administration really angry because we've taken time out of the very, very busy care providers' jobs, and what's going to not put high pressure on parents, but also show them that those moments that they're going to have anyway can be incredibly powerful brain building and relationship and connection moments.
Right. Great combination of answers, just wonderful. Let's open it up. We have time for just a couple of questions if from the audience. Absolutely. Amber, one sec, Tiffany over here. And I know we know everybody because we're all family now, but just reintroduce yourself for the folks that are live streaming.
Amber Angel with Los Angeles Valley College Family Resource Center. The story of my water breaking yesterday morning. Thank you, Anne, for having me relive that on my daughter's birthday.
Here to help.
So I just want to comment and just say thank you for sharing your story, Anthony, and specifically talking about how you're really looking out for children. and that you didn't feel slighted by your mom being in school. That's such an important narrative that I think we're doing a disservice to student parents, that I often hear that my daughter should be so proud of me because I'm going to school and this, that, and the other, but my daughter sees school as a negative thing because I'm constantly away from them. And so to know that like one day maybe my daughter can grow up and say that she doesn't feel slighted or that she can be an NFL player is very exciting to me. Because she can be anything she wants. You said so. But I guess my question is, and with your tracking data, you guys are all, how are we tracking children's outcomes? Like, what is the statistic on student parents and the children that see their parents go through school? Is there something out there? Are you guys tracking data at Raise the Bar for not only students, because we're not, you know, we have a very robust student parent program serving 1,000 students a year, and we're tracking student success. We're not tracking family or children's success, and I think that that's an opportunity.
So we're really new. We've only been operating for 3 years, and so we have a very small sample size, right? But what we did was we created a survey that was sent out to all of our scholarship recipients to ask questions about the impact of the scholarship funds and the child care funds. Did they work, and how did they work, and how can you tell? And so there were questions about did the scholarship free up time? Did you still have to work? Did you see how it impacted your child? What kind of child care are they receiving? Overall health and wellness of your child. So it was kind of a holistic approach to, did these dollars matter? And so we're getting feedback from the moms who have been recipients, and that's how we're tracking our data to see if, is a $2,000 child care payment for the year, does it work? Does it matter? Does it help? And how?
For you guys, anything? Collecting any data, Mia?
No, I mean,
Your storytelling, not
yes.
related to story.
Not in this area.
Hi, if I could comment. Gloria Perez, the President and CEO of Jeremiah Program, and thank you, Anthony and Lori, for what you do for children. What I would say to your question about tracking the data, it is really hard, although I would say many of us do this work because we've had experiences, and so we may not have formal evaluation data, but like, I was raised by a single mom, and I'm super proud of my mom, and don't blame her for having taken me to college when I was 9 years old, and I'd sit in the library, from 6 to 9, like doing nothing. And so, so now Jeremiah Children, our focus at Jeremiah is low-income single moms who have young children 4 or younger, and we provide early childhood. So they graduate, the moms and the kids graduate from the program when kids are maybe as old as 7. But we now have been in operation for 20 years, and we have some kids who have graduated from college that have come back to tell their story to our community. And they remember the relationships that they had. They remember the aunties that are still in their lives as a result of the program. And this is anecdotal data, but as we all know, evaluation longitudinally, costs money. And so we've chosen to do the right thing. We know investing in those kids early and often and creating that sense of community is where we're going to invest our dollars. But we do maintain those relationships because at the end of the day, we're all family, right? And so they're texting, they're on Facebook, social media saying, I need to go to college. Does anybody know of a resource? And their community is talking to them as now the second gen going to college to help them be successful. So the information's out there, so keep doing the work.
Yeah, and one thing I'll just plug in, Gloria, excellent comment, and a plug for Marjorie Sims, who is always looking for some extra work. There is a 2-gen evaluation framework for children and adults in their lives that spans this. There are different partners. We're looking at building an outcome bank, and so I do think this is one, as we're doing the work, wherever you are in your strategy, to that first principle of your North Star of, are you aligning towards the outcomes you're seeking? And there's just some supports and tools along the way for others that are out there or in the room. I think how we share tools like that, there are some, and Marjorie leads that on the team. Thank you, back there.
Hello, Jeremy Oyenki, Director of Youth and Learning for Santa Clara Pueblo. This comment, I guess it's not a question, but just a comment for the bars. I just wanted to commend you for also serving people of tribal communities. I have some tribal members which live in Minnesota and as well, and often it's an overlooked demographic, but just looking at your work and looking at the background of your work, I just wanted to commend you and thank you for doing that work with tribal members as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our very first scholarship recipient was Natasha Red Eagle from Red Rock Nation.
That's awesome. Charlotte and then Daniel. So I'll wrap it up.
Hi, Charlotte Perret. We talked a lot about, and we know that housing is vital to move families forward, to move anybody forward. But nobody's ever mentioned any wraparound service or any service that provides reproductive health to young women and young men. I haven't seen it mentioned. This unplanned pregnancies are a terribly difficult and an important issue. So I'm wondering why it's not been mentioned ever in anything that we've said, and is it possible to do it, to implement it, and where, at what stage, with what organization?
Thank you, Charlotte. Who would like to start?
Well, I know we have, we're talking about how, and not implementing this, but talking about how it would be really helpful for new moms to have the pediatrician and the OBGYN in the same space, or to have somebody who can be there in the clinic so that when you come in for one of your well-child visits, when you're, at risk for pregnancy again shortly thereafter, that you can get birth control and talk about family planning without having to schedule another appointment and figure out what, all of the difficult logistics. We're not there yet.
So I'm a big fan of reproductive justice, but that extends beyond contraception. It also means that people are able to raise their children the way they want to in safe environments. I think we have to be very, very careful when we talk about the dangers of unplanned pregnancy or being at risk of pregnancy. I have 2 children, and I've had 2 abortions, and all of those decisions were my decisions. And I had access to the things that I needed in order to make the decisions I wanted and to have abortions, and I had access to raise my children the way that I wanted to. So it's really, when we talk about choice, that's really what we mean, right? So the choice is not just the decision about whether or not you want to have a child, but it's also, if you decide to have a child, what circumstances are you going to be able to raise that child in? And I would go back to, again, the thing that frees that up for people, one is having access to contraception and abortion and proper health care. My God. It's 2019, and we're the wealthiest nation in the country, or in the world. So there's that piece. And then there is that we actually need to make sure those things are accessible to people so that they can make the choices that they want.
And well said. And many other programs we can fill you in on later. I want to get to Daniel for your last question, and then give each of the panelists a chance to sort of either respond to Daniel's question and or also give just a closing comment if you would like. Daniel.
Daniel, Strive graduate. My question is for Ms. Pressman. For the pediatrics, well, my son attended Mount Sinai. He was actually there. I had to take him out because there wasn't pediatricians that handled special needs at the time. And there was only one urologist, and every 6 months wasn't enough, and I needed help. So I had to take him away from there. Another one was there wasn't a lot of daycares or childcare that will handle my son because of special needs. So I was off job for 5 years just looking for childcare. And the special needs is what's really important for me, because I struggled a lot with him. And I couldn't get all the services he wanted. And the pediatricians was always being switched because of his insurance. Mm-hmm. So I couldn't, a pediatrician couldn't really keep track of him.
I'm so sorry that you went through that. And you're right. It's a huge problem at Mount Sinai, and I think at across all of the hospitals, our developmental pediatricians, there are only a couple of them. They're so highly specialized. They have a 6-month wait list, like you said. And so it does put the hospital in a position of not being able to take proper care of special needs families who are only going to see the pediatrician. And part of that conversation means arming pediatricians with the tools to help with special needs children and families. And part of it is figuring out, fixing the system in such a way that there isn't, because once you get a referral, it doesn't do you any good if you can't see anybody. I wish I could tell you that we note that problem and we've addressed it completely, and it's a huge, huge problem still. So I'm sorry. We'll get there.
Closing comment from you, Mia?
So I've just been thinking a lot about how much power exists in this room, and what it means, both the accountability that we have and the responsibility we have, and then who we're accountable to. Many of us, I know, are in a position where we feel like we're accountable to a funder, or our bosses, or the government, or whatever. But I want to, and I think about this a lot for myself, so this is not me just like preaching to you and telling you what to do. This is also a reminder to me. I want us to think about how are we accountable to the communities that we serve? And what does it look like for us to actually create a way for them to hold us accountable, like authentically hold us accountable? And that could look like a million different things. And I think it's incredibly challenging to figure out what that could look like. But I think that until the communities that we serve actually feel like they have some of the power that we have, we're going to continue to to make decisions that are not in their best interest, make decisions that disempower them.
Thank you, Mia. Lori and Anthony, do you want to close?
Sure. No, it's been an honor to be here. I mentioned last night at dinner, I play professional football. I play in front of 80,000 people, and I won't flinch, but you give me a room like this, and I start sweating up a storm. But it's good, getting out of my comfort zone and doing something different. And the work we're doing is great work. We're going to continue to empower these single moms and their children. I think empowerment's the biggest thing, really giving them choice and let them gain control of their lives instead of kind of being lost. Give them a focus, give them some direction. And then just appreciate all the good work you guys are all doing. Continue to do the right thing. We all know right from wrong. Continue to choose right. Continue to do work, and let's continue to make a difference.
Oh my gosh. Wonderful, wonderful final conversation before we have our last gift for you all. And I just, before we officially thank the panel here, I just wanted to pull out a couple things that you all have sort of said and spoken to. Laura, your comment about sort of zero sum, I think is really, really important. Like really, for someone to have does not mean you will not. Mm-hmm. And when we think about power, and I just, scarcity or abundance, generosity or closure. And that is such a profoundly important thing, I think, that plays out. I went to absolute and relative economics, which actually flies in the face of this, but to literally spirit and soul. And I just think as we're talking about the narrative of family and community, it's just really important for us to always, where a story starts, who starts that story, who's that narrative? For us as a country, we are still kind of dealing with the narrative of our country. And so when we think about all, not to end on sort of a big complex thing, but how we're going to come together as a country and a community and know our history and know our future and know the pain and the brilliance that we all have, I think this is at the heart of it. And so this piece of accountability to one another and to the communities we serve is really important. And then, kind of connecting that to really practical steps we take when you're at one of your most vulnerable steps, walking into a hospital. How are you greeted and connected in a way that you might, you get some new information, you get the service, you get the connected, but how those institutions and experiences we have all really lead us to that we are kind of getting closer to, Kwame, you're breathing, we are one, we are connected. I think is really, really quite profound. So please join me in thanking Lori, Anthony, Mia, and Elisa for their important work and their wonderful comments.